You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the show that talks to newsmakers from Nassau and Suffolk County that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week we have a conversation about issues that affect all of us, and if you live on Long Island and commute every day into Manhattan, you've noticed a lot of news around the Long Island Railroad lately. And not all of it is very positive. So now we get to get the inside scoop by welcoming back to our show Alfonso Castillo, transit reporter from Newsday and Newsday.com, who writes about the LIRR and all things railroad, I would assume. And he can be found on Twitter at Alfonso Reports. Well, welcome back, Alfonso. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Bill, for having me, as always.
Well, you've been busy this week. You had a slew of stories about a lot going on.
Yeah, it was a particularly crazy week, for sure. I think I had 3 page one stories in 4 days. And as you touched on, unfortunately, none of it was good news for Long Island Railroad riders. I mean, nothing to celebrate. We had delays on various projects, talk of a fare increase, talk of some potential service reductions. So, just a whole heap of bad news this week.
Right. And overriding a lot of that is we've heard about this national railroad strike.
Right. That too. I guess there was a little bit of good news there, and I haven't checked this morning, but it does look like that at least will be averted. Right.
But that seems kind of weird to me, too. I mean, these guys have a contract and then the government steps in and says, well, yeah, you have a contract except for this.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And that's what collective bargaining is supposed to be about, right? Is that both sides come to the table. And if you can't figure something out, the law allows for either side to take extreme measures, which are supposed to force a resolution. And while I'm sure everybody who would have been affected by the strike is glad to see some kind of resolution, as you touched on, this is not exactly the way it's supposed to work, right? I mean, it's the two sides that are supposed to come to a resolution and not have some, government intervene. I know the law allows for it as a last resort, but in the end, those sick days that the railroad workers were looking for, they just didn't get. And obviously they were willing to walk out for that and strike for that, and ultimately didn't even become an option for them. Right.
So those sick days are a dead issue? Because I wasn't sure. I
believe so. Yeah. I mean, I think that was like the one sticking point and the one as far as I know, and again, I haven't checked this morning.
Yeah, it could change everything.
That was not part of the final resolution. It's worth noting that wasn't going to directly affect any kind of railroading on Long Island. It didn't affect Long Island Railroad workers, nor even the limited amount of freight railroads that operate on Long Island. But there was certainly going to be kind of a trickle down. I mean, there was concerns about what that would have meant to the supply chain. I talked to Will Flower, who runs the Brookhaven Rail Terminal, which is a short line railroad, and they kind of carry the freight that's delivered out here that last mile. And his workers were not going to be affected, but he made the point, if those goods don't make their way somehow to New York, there's nothing for them to transport for the last mile. So it absolutely would have had an impact. And I spoke with somebody else who made the point that in a roundabout way, maybe this is all good in terms of it gets people talking and thinking about something that they usually don't. And that is the importance of freight rail on Long Island. And, every truck you see on the LIE, could be eliminated if you had more freight running out. I got a figure from Will Flower, and I think he said that his railroad handles something like 4,000 train carloads of freight each year, and that takes off the equivalent of 150,000 trucks off of the road. So it makes a big impact.
Yeah, really. Well, was there any real fear that the workers on Long Island would go out in solidarity with their national brethren, so to speak?
Well, the last time this kind of flared up was back in September, and then there was a tentative deal everybody thought that would avert it. But back when this was looming in September, there was at least one Long Island Railroad union, the Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen, which is a pretty large union, that made it clear that they would not cross picket lines. Now, the situation there would have had to be that the affected unions would have set up picket lines somewhere where Long Island Railroad workers report to work. So they show up and you've got a picket line there, and they said we would not cross them. Right. The MTA has said they don't believe there are any locations where that could happen, where railroad union workers share a work site with the affected freight unions. But there was some question about that. It was, I don't know how realistic a threat it was, but it was at least out there.
Yeah.
And again, when you talk about something that would have been so overarching and crippling potentially for the nation's economy, it goes without saying that there would have been some effect to Long Island and to everyone.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah. Wow. Well, I have a list of questions. You had so many articles.
Yeah.
The issue everyone's eager to learn more about, the MTA needs to figure out how to shrink the projected annual deficit that could reach a reported $3 billion. And the first thing they think of doing is creating what you reported has the potential of being the highest fare increase in a decade at 5.5%. What are the details about that? When would that take effect if they indeed do that?
It looks like it wouldn't happen before next spring. The process here is you'd have to come out with a specific fare proposal, then hold public hearings for that proposal, and then the full MTA board would have to vote. The chairman of the MTA said he wouldn't expect to hold the public hearings before February. And then again, you need some time after that for the rest of the process to play out. So typically when they've done these fare increases in the last few years, it usually goes into effect sometime in the spring. So if it happens, and they point out that it may not, they're happy to put it aside, take it off the table if their government partners step up and deliver the money to avert a fare increase, as has happened in recent years. It was scheduled. The way the MTA has worked for about a dozen years or more now, they're on a schedule of raising fares every other year. For a number of years, it was 7%. For about the last 10 years, it's been 4%, which, they justify by saying essentially just keeping up with inflation. Having they foregoed a fare increase over the last 2 years because of COVID, and because, again, their government partners essentially made them whole without having to raise fares. So they were able to put it off for an entire cycle. So it's been 2019 since they raised fares. And because of that, they say the 5.5%, while larger than what they've been doing for a number of years, they still think it's kind of a modest increase, 1.5 over what they would have done anyway at 4%. But it's not insignificant. I did some of the math and certainly for monthly ticket holders on Long Island Railroad, it would add several dollars to their monthly ticket. How exactly they get to that percentage can be complicated. It's not as simple as just adding 5.5% to your ticket price, because there's all kinds of ways they could get there. Sometimes it's a matter of reducing discount amounts on certain kinds of Metro cards. There's all kinds of tricks they could use. The 5.5% is what they would look to increase the revenue that they bring in by, which doesn't necessarily mean a straight 5.5% increase on tickets. That said, on the Long Island Railroad, it usually is that simple. At least for the bigger tickets, it usually is just a matter of kind of calculating roughly what the percentage would be on your ticket.
Well, it's analogous to. It reminds me of if you're selling coffee and you're selling a 16-ounce can of coffee and you only put 10 ounces of coffee in it and you charge the same price.
Right. Exactly.
So here we go. So, it may not equate out to a 5.5, but somehow, although you're either getting a ride or you're not, it's like,
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. The other thing that's worth pointing out in this, and I don't think a lot of attention has been brought to it, but it should be out there in terms of fairness, is that the Long Island Railroad lowered ticket prices, at least on monthly tickets, earlier this year. This is when they're kind of luring customers back. And you remember for 2+ years there, they were only charging off-peak fares. And when they returned to peak fares earlier this year, they threw monthly commuters a bone by cutting the cost of a monthly ticket by 10%. So even with a 5.5% increase, I think they'd still be below where they were, around when the pandemic started. So that's for monthly ticket holders. And that also, I haven't got an answer on this, but that also assumes that they don't return to the pre-COVID monthly ticket cost before putting the 5.5%, which is, I can't imagine that it'd be a 15.5% increase, but I haven't heard that it's not going to be.
Yeah, I'd like to hear the spin on that, how that happens. So something else here, the transit agency also introduced other strategies to cut costs. Using passenger data to reduce certain train lengths and modify weekday schedules. So Long Island Railroad riders hear that, and all they want to know is, can I still get a seat, and will my train still be there?
Yeah, my ears absolutely perked up when I heard that one, and they were quick to sort of explain how this would work and try to alleviate concerns. And so during the pandemic, they've rolled out some really innovative technology to count passenger loads, ridership on every train. The riders see it when they're on a platform, and now the digital signs will usually show, it's kind of color coded. There's more seats in the front of a train than in the back of a train. That information is also available on your app. And essentially what they're doing is that they're weighing the cars in real time. They use some kind of like sensors built into the suspension system. And so they can know there's this many riders on average on this car and this many on this car. And so for the first time ever, really, they've got real accurate, or mostly accurate counts of how many people are on each train and even each car of each train. And what they're looking to do is to use that data to make some decisions about whether some trains can be shorter than they are. They say that this is something that they will roll out first at Metro North, and presumably they will eventually bring it to the Long Island Railroad. The one kind of sticking point there is that you've got this new service that's supposedly coming to Grand Central Madison, which is very much going to change ridership patterns. So they want that to settle in somewhat and have, I guess, some amount of time to gather data about what new ridership patterns are before they make any changes. So I don't think it's anything that is very imminent at the Long Island Railroad, but they made it clear that they are working toward this. And the other one that they suggested is potentially having different schedules for different days of the week. And I don't mean a weekday schedule and a weekend schedule like they've long had, but potentially a Monday schedule that is a little bit different than a Tuesday schedule. And the reason for that is another thing that's kind of come out of the pandemic is that ridership patterns are different day to day. And with folks more flexibility with going into work, they're seeing and have seen significantly higher ridership in the middle of the week, Tuesday through Thursday, than Monday and Friday, with people, I guess, making it 3-day weekends, at least working from home. So I guess their thought is, if we have a lot of trains running largely empty on Mondays and Fridays, do we need to run those trains?
Right. I mean, it gets down to that feeling of super micromanagement, though, doesn't it?
Well, when they're eyeing this fiscal cliff, which is the word they use, which is it is kind of a baked in deficit that also goes to COVID and their ridership losses. At the latest numbers they gave is that they don't expect to have even they expect to be around 80% of pre-COVID ridership by 2025, I believe. So, they're not getting back all the riders they lost anytime soon. It can be many, many years. So that's just lost money, right? Those are just fare paying customers who are no longer paying fares anymore. And they need to account for that. So, again, there is this structural deficit that's just kind of built into their budget, and they've got to figure out a way to close it. And they're looking to cut costs however they can. Jan Lieber, the MTA chairman over there, I think was frank in talking about how over the years there have been some unrealistic cost-cutting goals that were never going to happen in terms of consolidating different agencies and departments. And I think the thought here is let's use new technologies to find ways to cut costs without compromising the customer experience. It's a real question whether that's the case here. I mean, when you're talking, the president of the Long Island Railroad assured that they would target, trains that were low ridership as far as taking cars away and even potentially adjusting schedules. But that's always a slippery slope, right? I mean, if a train and one thing, I mean, we might have talked about this the last time I was on. Yes, trains are a lot lighter and less crowded now. But riders like that, right? I mean, they like having a room to breathe. And I think they see the MTA and the Long Island Railroad moving back towards, cramming as many people as they can in a train car. And I know there are technically enough seats for everyone, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be comfortable.
Yeah. A reminder to the listening audience, you're listening to this week's Long Island News on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHBC. My name's Bill McIntyre, and my guest today is Alfonso Castillo, the transit reporter from Newsday and Newsday.com. I always think, it's like whenever you hear cost cutting from any corporation or there doesn't seem to be a spotlight on the holes that are in their own net.
Right.
Things that they could, and something I'm not all that familiar with the idea of the Inspector General for the MTA. I guess he does exactly what that says, right? Generally oversees contracts or?
Yeah, I think they're without one right now. It's actually something I've got to check. When the focus on overtime was really high a few years back, when some of those reports surfaced of in particular, Long Island Railroad workers sometimes tripling their salaries with overtime. The then Governor Cuomo brought in a new Inspector General who was really kind of a bulldog, a former federal prosecutor, to kind of whip everybody into shape, so to speak. And she was very productive and proactive in. I don't know what she was here 2-3 years ago about. I don't know what it's been now, 6 months to a year ago. She left for another job, and I believe I'm sure there's somebody in an acting capacity in that role, but I don't think they have replaced the Inspector General yet. But they are a watchdog, sort of. But I don't know that they're going to tell them necessarily exactly how to spend their money. I think they look for instances of wrongdoing, but maybe not bad decisions. Right.
Well, the reason I brought that up is that I am aware of a company here on Long Island that has an issue with one of the MTA specs. It looks as though something has been spec'd, what they would call a proprietary, meaning it may say in the spec that you can get this one or an equal. But then they spec it out. It's so specific that they won't allow any equal. So this case is actually going on now, and it's been sent, and the company is saying that they've had no response from the MTA, no response from the Inspector General, and it's pretty clear in this instance. A contractor comes to the MTA and says, okay, I'm going to do this portion of the job for you. Let me see the specs. And they give him the specs and okay, we have to get all of this gear. That contractor has to go and get the product that is spec'd, even if it says or equal. And this is what this man is saying, is that he's gotten an or equal and he keeps getting turned down. And He says that there's no reason for the turn down, seeing as how the product he's talking about is already working in wastewater treatment plants and sites for the MTA all over the tri-state area. So why are they turning it down? Here's the deal. The proprietary one that they spec'd is going to cost $600,000 more than the or equal that he's come up with, which is going to cost the contractor has to lay that out. But basically what it's doing is creating a $600,000 slush fund. Mm-hmm. And some of these companies, the scuttlebutt is about how, they go on a job site and there's a few bucks for this guy and a few bucks for that guy. And, oh, by the way, here's my product, and it fits your spec. And, oh, okay, we'll take a couple of dozen of those. And, so the holes in the net that I'm talking about, this is one instance, and I'm talking about $500,000. The East Side Access Project has gone over 25 years, are we talking?
Well, so it depends where you start counting, I guess. Right. Construction started 15 years ago. That's not entirely true because
I saw the plans a long time ago.
Oh, right. And the tunnel across the East River that brings you there actually started being built, I think, the 1960s.
Yeah, right.
So it goes way, way back. Yeah, but I think you're pointing to something that there's at least, I did not know the specifics of that situation, but there is, this is, I think, exactly the kind of, and I don't know if they use the word waste, but misspent funds that they're looking to rein in. I know that in talking about some of these cost cutting measures in their presentation the other day, they talked about how they recently, I guess, sort of auditing their energy costs, realized that they overpaid something to the tune of it was in the seven figures, and we're now looking to recoup that money. It's a funny thing, and I get jaded myself covering this beat as long as I have, that you even see a few millions or tens of millions and even hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's like, what's another $600 million among friends? Yeah, exactly. But right. I mean, when you're dealing with projects in the billions, maybe there's some not as much priority put on some of these lower ticket items, but obviously, it all adds up. And when you're trying to cut $3 billion somewhere, every little bit's going to matter.
Well, I think we should all, it's a great, I guess, a little bit of entertainment to go and see the original budget number, and then to see what it was, and the stack of change orders that occurred during that job.
No, I mean, I think they're candid. Speaking specifically about East Side Access, I think they're candid about East Side Access having been very mismanaged for a long time. It's sort of interesting now that we're, kind of at the finish line of East Side Access. I think there is a lot of looking back and contemplating, what have we done here? The history of this project was that this was kind of a pet project by former Senator Al D'Amato. The Second Avenue subway was kind of in its planning stages at the time, and this was looked at as a big boon for Manhattan residents. And Senator D'Amato wanted something he wanted his own mega project for Long Islanders and Long Island Railroad riders. But I think the project at the time, the expectation was it would be done by 2009. At a cost of about $4 billion. And here we are at the end of 2022. It's still not done. Project is over $11 billion now.
And counting, right?
And beyond that, there are fewer people on the railroad, right? So there's a whole question of even the utility of this thing. The idea was there's going to be so much demand for jobs on Manhattan's east side that people will just be rushing to these trains and they'll be packed. The figure they were using up until COVID was 160,000 riders just to Grand Central every day. And I don't think they're carrying on a lot of days. I'm not sure they're carrying 160,000 riders at all these days. So,
yeah. Well,
but here we are.
Anything you want to tell us you think we should know as far as, well,
I am mindful of being too negative, and when you have a story like or a set of stories this week like I had, the other one was about the MTA's OMNY fare, new fare payment system that's late. Originally it was supposed to be on the Long Island Railroad at 2021. Now they're looking at maybe 2025. So it does seem like a slew of bad news. That said, whether it happens this month, next month, February, East Side Access is almost here. It really does look amazing down there. I've been there relatively recently. Commuters who are just sick and jaded of the conditions in Penn Station are going to have a brand new 700,000 square foot terminal, larger than anything they've been in before, larger than the actual Grand Central Terminal above it. The comparison they've been using lately is that it is the Chrysler Building on its side. So that's how big a terminal, and it is almost here. Might it be a little bit late? It certainly seems like that's possible right now, but it is going to be a transformational experience. I mean, I think most, nor should they, but I think most kind of rank and file Long Island Railroad riders don't even know that this thing is coming, right? Right. A brand new station. So you jump on your train and you've got an option rather from going to Penn Station. There are some pros and cons to that. It might mean fewer trains to Penn Station, so not everybody's going to be thrilled about it. But it is going to be an entirely new experience. We're almost there.
Wow. Yeah. My real curiosity is just wondering how long it's going to keep the people quiet.
Yeah, well, I don't think it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, just look at the second hand on your watch.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so true. Well, it looks like the clock on the wall is telling us we got to fly.
Yeah,
we have so much more. I mean, there's so much more to talk about, but I'm glad we get to see you incrementally as.
I'm always happy to come on, Bill.
Yeah, that's great, and thank you so much. We'll talk to you very soon.
All right, happy holidays, everybody.
You too. Take care.
Take care.
And my guest today has been Alfonso Castillo, transit reporter from Newsday and Newsday.com. And we want to thank him for putting the time aside. There's a lot of issues about the railroad stuff, but you heard what he said and what he's telling us about not much should change, but and then it could. In any event, the clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to get on out of here. I'm Bill McIntyre, and remember, you can listen to us every Friday at 3 p.m. right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.